Hi guys, and welcome to Unapologetic. I'm your host, Amala. Taylor is in the producer's bay.
Who's ready to rumble?
There will be no rumbling today, but we are getting into the gender debate, as we so often do on this show. But today, we have two special guests and two unlikely guests. Let's get into it. Young Apollo with the We're back. Today I have two guests on the show, Blossom Brown and Buck Angel, who I'm very familiar with, but you might not be so familiar with, as they don't tend to typically run in the same spaces that we do. Buck you may recognize from a Supreme debate with Charlie Kirk, and Blossom you'll recognize if you see the Jubilee Middle Ground video that I did, Trans Women versus Conservative Women, which is not out yet. Can't wait for you guys to see it. So, guys, thank you for being on the show.
Right on.
Thank you, guys.
So, Blossom, I'll have you introduce yourself first, since we've been acquainted. We've met.
Yeah.
Talk about who you are, what you do, and why you're here today.
Absolutely. I'm Coach Blossom C. Brown. I'm an activist. I'm an astrologer. I'm a life coach. I'm a professional tarot reader, entrepreneur. I'm originally from the birthplace of blues. I'm the first Black trans woman to graduate from my university with a degree in public health education.
Amazing.
The world got to know my story in season 1 of Caitlyn Jenner's show, I Am Kate, and on season 13 of The Ellen Show. I also have my own documentary called One Life to Blossom on Tubi and different platforms. And most people also know me for disrupting the 2019 CNN LGBTQ town hall during Don Lemon and Beta O'Rourke's session, calling for the inclusion of transgendered women, Black trans women in particular. And I'm here today because it's really, really important that people get to hear my perspective as a Black person, as a trans person, as someone who's very open to listening to other discussions and other people's opinion, because I always love to take up space. And it's so important for me to take up space, because if I don't, I feel like a lot of experiences don't get to be heard. And so that's why I'm here, to vibe with y'all, have some conversation, and do what I need to do.
Amazing. And welcome. Now, Buck, let's get into your story. Who are you? Why are you here? What do you do?
I don't have a clue after that. So, my name is Buck Angel. I'm a transsexual man. I transitioned 30 years ago to live my life as a male. I work in the adult entertainment business. I create sexual wellness products. I also really have a lot of debate on the internet about, I have a lot of differences with my community. So I would say, I wouldn't call myself an outlier in the community. I just have different opinions, and I don't necessarily agree with a lot that's going on today. And that's probably why I sit here and why I've been on a lot of more conservative type shows. That tend to only be the ones that want to listen to what I have to say, because I do not agree with a lot that's happening. So I'm the guy who basically is willing to have the sort of opposite opinion of my community.
Wow, well, I love to hear it. And it's important to acknowledge there is such a spectrum of belief when it comes to these issues. You're going to meet two people who we deem to be members of the same community today who have very, very different perspectives on the issues. And that's important, and it's a good thing to acknowledge. I want to thank you both for actually coming here and being on the show. I can't tell you how difficult it is to get people to come and talk about these subject matters, as you probably know. So what we're going to do today, I'm going to put out a series of statements that really approach the issues from a conservative perspective, and you can let me know if you agree or disagree. I do want to let you guys vocalize who you are, your opinions, so feel free to duke it out with each other. I'll sprinkle in my 2 cents every now and then to let you know how we're feeling about certain things, but really I just want to explore your life experiences, why you are in the stage of life that you're in right now, why you've made the choices that you've made, and what you think when it comes to the gender debate. All right?
Great.
Okay, we're ready? I don't think it'll get too heated, but if it does, we're adults. We can handle it. We got this.
We're good.
Okay, so statement number 1 is a really hot button one, and it's one that many differ on. And here's the statement: gender dysphoria is a mental illness. Now, either of you can hop in and give me your initial beliefs on this.
I agree. I would say more of a mental disorder than a mental illness. I do have a mental disorder. I do have had a diagnosis 30 years ago of what we call gender dysphoria. And my dysphoria is a disorder. And only way that I could actually fix on some level my disorder was to understand that disorder means that I don't necessarily see myself in the way I want the world to see me. So being born, I'm a biological female, born biologically female, and I wanted to live and be a man. And that was where my dysphoria laid. So my dysphoria needed to be sort of checked by a professional therapist. And I went to 2 years of therapy, who diagnosed me as somebody who had gender dysphoria. And from there I went on to take hormones and do surgery. And now I present to the world as a male.
Sure.
And so for me, that's where I lie in the fact that I have a mental disorder that I sort of fixed, for lack of a better word.
I'm curious to hear. So you identify as transsexual, and,
Yes.
and that's how you're introduced, which is obviously very different from transgender.
Yes.
Can you explain that background so that people at home know what you mean by that?
Sure, great.
Yeah.
Thank you for asking.
Of course.
So today we have what's called transgender, and we have also transsexual. Transsexual has been sort of pushed out of the narrative in the trans space. And I think because people call it antiquated, old, some people feel it's on some level like a derogatory statement. I disagree. For me, a transsexual person is somebody who does live in the binary, who wants to be either male or female, who understands that they have a disorder called gender dysphoria, and want to just move forward in the world and live as men and women. We use surgery, we use hormones, we use all of those things in order to medicate ourselves, in order to present. It's real basic. We present to the world as men and women, and we also all understand, transsexual people understand the diagnosis of gender dysphoria, where now I believe transgender is now an umbrella term that encompasses many, many, many different identity choices. Even it could be somebody who has had a transition like myself, but calls themselves transgender. But I think transsexual is very specific to a mental disorder, to transitioning through the medical space, and wanting to live in the world as a binary sort of person. Does that make sense?
Yes, it does. And you still acknowledge in all the work that you do, I am biologically female.
Yes.
I just present as a male. So
That's
we're
right.
really taking on the social construction of gender and saying,
right.
I just want to be perceived as male.
100%.
Okay, got that. Okay, and Blossom, how do you feel about this? How do you feel about gender dysphoria being a medical disorder? Is that something that you subscribe yourself to?
Yeah, a couple of things here.
Yeah.
Question, are you a Gen Xer?
I am a boomer.
A boomer? Okay.
I'm 60 years old.
Okay, gotcha.
Yeah.
And so I'm a millennial, so
Okay.
let me name, first of all, that we're in two different generations,
That's
okay?
right.
Yes.
So the terminology is going to be a lot different. It's going to be very mutable because as things progress, as gender identity and sexual orientation, all these different things progress, the language and the vocabulary is going to progress. Do I think gender dysphoria is a mental illness? Absolutely not. It's really important to remember that the trans experience is not a monolith. That just because Buck has his opinion about what it is, that doesn't mean that that needs to be put on me, nor we need to deem that the entire experience. And anything I say as well, too, it goes both ways. I think for me, when it comes to gender dysphoria, a lot of us have struggled so much with our identity and being able to freely live who we are. And depending on where you live geographically, you may not have access to be able to align that, to be able to fix that. So for me, I think it was a big process where, I lived, like in Mississippi where I live, they called it gender identity disorder. So that used to make me cringe more than anything. Being, going to the doctor and, getting treated for other stuff and then having this gender identity disorder on my paperwork, it was just so, it felt very detrimental to my health. And so the reality of it is gender dysphoria, I cannot put it in the category of I cannot put that in the category of mental illness because I think mental illness in itself is already stigmatized so much that putting gender dysphoria there and aligning it with trans and non-binary folks, because I also want to bring my non-binary siblings into this.
Interesting. Okay.
I think we really need to unpack that to really get down to the nitty-gritty of it, but I don't think gender dysphoria is a mental illness.
It's interesting because I think a lot of the reason why maybe trans people in particular or people who identify with the progressive left would say I don't think it's a disorder is because mental health has been stigmatized, because we view the word disorder as something that is inherently negative.
That's right.
Where a disorder is not necessarily inherently negative. It's just something that we deal with. And if I was waking up every day, which I will say, luckily, I do not, feeling discomfort in my body and looking in the mirror and going, this is not what I like, this is not who I am, I would feel disordered. Now, that does not have to be something that is negative or is stigmatized, but because we have stigmatized mental health,
yes.
Which I think there could be a sort of power in saying, yes, I do deal with a disorder and it is normal.
That's me, my friend.
Okay.
No, so I 100% respect what you're saying, Blossom, and I get it. And that's before I move on, I just want to let you know that I'm not speaking for anybody but myself here.
Yes,
and so that being said, it is important that people hear us as different people and that we have different ways of being in this particular space. It doesn't mean that I don't disagree or agree with that. For me, it was extremely important that I got this diagnosis because I'm 60 years old. I was diagnosed 30 years ago and people didn't even understand. They pushed against me so hard. They did not understand what was happening to me. So the minute I got that diagnosis, I was like, oh my gosh. It's like anybody with you get a cancer diagnosis or a diabetes or whatever. I don't, that all of a sudden you're like, oh, that's why I've been feeling this way. Oh, that's why my stomach hurts all the time. Oh, that's why. And so for me, that diagnosis saved my life on some level. It literally gave me this opportunity to say, what are the next steps? And remember, when I did it, I was the first person in Los Angeles as trans male, as female to male, to get these things. So my doctors didn't even, I was their first on all levels, which was also kind of a scary experience because one doctor called me a guinea pig. He actually, I mean, I can laugh now, but
terrifying.
You're sweating. You're like, am I making the wrong or right choice here? So again, for me, the disorder was important because today I don't live in that disorder, but I know my disorder and I know how to sort on some level fix my disorder.
Interesting. Okay, so I'm curious. So for you, I would imagine that the way, and I'll call out some conservatives here, a lot of conservatives use the words illness, disorder in this sort of punching down manner to say that there is something deeply wrong and that you have an affliction that they want you to recognize. They want you to know you have an illness. Has that affected the way you view the categorization of what we would call a disorder, but you may not? No,
because I think it's right-wing propaganda, to be quite honest with you. And I think that they always try to use it because they don't really have a firm foundation to stand on anything. I think people gag at the trans experience. They're gagging at the trans, non-binary, gender non-conforming, intersex, two-spirit community because we're rising to an occasion that we've never risen to before. We're much more people are much more aware of who we are. They're very much more aware of our experience, what we've gone through. And I think it's really important to be inclusive of all the different experiences for the most part. I think people who are because I feel like there's different levels when we talk about being conservative or whatever that I've just really have noticed. Like there's this very radical level where we're seeing the politicians trying to keep trans people out of the bathrooms of their choice, trying to implement these anti-trans legislation to try to keep trans people away from basic human rights. And I find it really interesting that when you get past that, you can begin to pick them apart. Let's be clear, because a lot of them are not intelligent, no tea, no shade, and they're not really trying to learn about the experience. They just want to keep themselves in power. And for them, it empowers them to demean and try to take away from communities that have less than. And let's be very clear, yes, we're in the same community, but let's look at the nuances here as well. You're white, I'm black, but we're both trans. And the reality of it is, although we have those things like that or whatever, we still are in a place of privilege within the trans community because we both have platforms. You know what I'm saying? And so
but where does that privilege come from? Does it just automatically come, or does the work matter? Does my 30 years of work matter to get me into that space?
Yeah.
Well, yes, of course it does.
I think it's a combination of everything, but let's also look at the reality too. Like you just said, guinea pig. I think we are guinea pig to cisness, to be quite honest with you, because a lot of our resources for trans people are within the cis community.
But the cis community is the world.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, that's the world.
Exactly. So let's call that out. Let's name that. Because the reality of it is, again, because the world and society tries to deem trans and non-binary people as the bottom of the barrel because of gender
That's not
identity.
My experience in any way, shape, or form.
That may not be your experience, but the reality of it is, again, because you are a white person.
Okay, so
because before we even get into gender identity,
but I think
because you are a white person,
okay,
you will always have access that I will never be able to have as a black person.
That's
you
true.
will always be able to get in spaces, much higher, powerful spaces than I would as a black person. Number one. Now, with that being said, when we add the trans identity on there, looking at it from the whole spectrum, when we look at cisness, to a certain degree, when you add that transness on top of your whiteness, it kind of takes away, or there's an illusion being taken away that of your whiteness that deems you put into the same category as bottom of the barrel because of your transness. And this is what a lot of our white trans siblings need to really understand here, that although you may feel like to a certain degree you're discriminated against because of your transness, you still have much more of a power play in the trans community because of your whiteness. And we need to really wake that up, and we really don't need to be afraid to have that conversation. Now, I'm gonna tell you why I have a little bit more grace and compassion with you. Because my parents are baby boomers. And that's the reason why I asked about your generation. Because during that time, the language was a lot different. Transsexual, transvestite, those different words were much more implemented during that time.
Sure.
So I understand the language there. The problem that I've seen from a lot of baby boomers and a lot of older Gen Xers is they don't want to be mutable to the vocabulary and to the language as we move along during the years. And what I mean by that is, as the language evolves, our thinking needs to evolve.
Okay.
But at the same time too, I don't believe in you erasing yourself, and erasing your experiences that you've gone through. But part of the problem, I think, Buck, is, especially when you post on Twitter, because I've seen some of your tweets and everything, or whatever, it's really important that when we discuss our own opinions around things, that we have to do what you said earlier. Name it, hey, this is my experience. This is my opinion. This is not the entire trans community.
Oh, right.
That. And I've had to learn that myself as well, too. So
let's break that down, because a lot of points were hit there, and I want to give you time to respond to some very...
Sorry,
no, you're fine, you're fine.
You're fine. That's all good.
As each point is made, I want to, let's try to pause and get a relation to each thing. No worries, because I know you have a lot to say and a lot to hit on. Okay, Buck, so let's respond to the whiteness idea here, because the claim is really that your moving through the world is a lot easier due to you being white. Even though you deal with this transsexual identity, which can be very difficult to navigate the world in. And I do want to say that you transitioned at a time that is harder than anybody in the modern day transitioning now. So we should acknowledge that too. Do you feel as though your whiteness pedestalized you in that journey?
I'm going to say no, but here's the deal. I'm not black, so I don't have the black experience. So I can't really speak to that. Now, she can speak to it because she has the black experience, but she cannot speak to the white experience. Now, that being said, I have 100% compassion for black trans people, and I understand the difficult space it's in and all of that stuff. That being said, I can't speak in that arena because I don't. Now, my journey has been very difficult, and it has been so difficult on some levels that I did want to kill myself, and I did become an alcoholic, and I did become a crackhead, and I was homeless, and I was a prostitute, and many things that people don't know about me, that I struggled to get to this space. Now, as a white person, does that mean anything? Does my color have anything to do with that? Or does it have to do with my struggling in my gender identity? So there are those things. I can't argue the race card on this because it doesn't, for me, I don't live that, but I have a huge amount of compassion for it. So when I speak, like she said, when I speak on Twitter or anywhere else, I say, this is how I feel about that situation. And I'm very understanding of the fact that we have lots of different things going on in this community now that I do not resonate with in any way, shape, or form. And as a transsexual, I also want to say that there's a huge amount of a younger generation now accepting that identity of transsexual.
Yes.
They are now reclaiming transsexual because I worked very hard to put that out there to say, hey, wait a minute here. Transsexual is not derogatory, and it is an actual part of our community. And so now many young people are connecting to that word transsexual.
So here's the thing that we also have to remember too, and I'm looking at the cisgender community and the trans community.
And we'll pause for the audience. For those of you who don't understand what cis means, it means, you identify with the sex, the biological sex that you were born with. So I would be a cisgendered individual. So when we talk about cisness or cisgendered, that's what we're talking about. Now, we might have some differing on those terms and whether or not we accept those terms, but that's what it means.
No, thank you for that. No,
so continue.
Thank you for saying that.
Sure.
So, for me, when I look at the perspective of being cisgender and being trans, and going back to what you were saying, you know, our community is small, but it's mighty. Let's be very clear. We are a mighty, powerful community. And part of the problem here is within our trans community, there's this level of classism that we really aren't ready to address yet. There's also this white supremacy, all of these other isms within our trans and non-binary community that we've never really had that public platform to talk about, because there's always this thing where we all have to move together. Like, this is all of our time together. We have to band together. We can't talk about these things. But it's also actually hurting our community, and it's hurting the experience that we all have. Because here's the thing, Buck. Again, you as a white, I know you... Can I say white trans man or?
Well, I don't necessarily identify as a trans man, but you can do that for this particular show.
Okay, I just want. Okay,
no, that's all good.
Like,
I appreciate it.
Of course.
I appreciate it.
So, as a white trans man, again, because of the power of your platform, the reality of it is because trans men are not seen too often, and they're just now kind of start to be seen. The things that I'm not gonna say. I'm gonna use we statements instead of you, because I don't want to make it seem like I'm just.
It's okay though. I'm cool. Yeah, I'm
Go for it. Speak freely.
You know, the things that you say on Twitter, they may seem empowering to you, but they're very demeaning to other trans men. And the reality is, it makes their struggle a lot harder than it would be for you, because you've been in the game for so long. People respect you. People empower you. People will invite you into certain spaces that a lot of trans masculine folks, cannot get in. And I think, and I don't speak for the trans male experience. I don't. I'm coming from a place of listening to trans masculine folks who are close and dear to me and listening to their experience, because I too get to be in spaces that a lot of them don't get to be in. And so I feel like I have a responsibility to
But how
say
did you
this.
get to that space?
I got to that space because of my mouth.
That's right. How did I get to this space?
Determination.
Because of my mouth.
Yeah.
Not because of my skin color.
I got into the skin color has nothing to do with it, but I got into this space because I showed the world unapologetically.
So did I.
Who I was.
So did I.
But the reality.
But why are those trans men not doing the same thing I'm doing?
But still, they don't have the privilege.
I don't speak for trans men, and it's not my problem if they don't like it. They need to step up and start to speak for themselves.
Volunteering through the Human Rights Campaign. The Human Rights Campaign gave me my platform. Let me be very clear. It was an entity that gave me my platform. I don't know if that was the case with you, but a lot of trans folks don't get entities as a privilege to be able to voice who they are. And let me be clear, because I also had Caitlyn Jenner. I also had Ellen DeGeneres. I had celebrities. And I'm going to keep it 100% real. And whether people can say I was tokenized or not, I benefited from it, honey. Because I got to where I am today doing what I need to do. But the reality of it is, because you know this, Buck, you know the resources in the trans community are barely minimum. And that we've had to work so much harder than cisgender folks to get to where we are.
Any marginalized group needs to do that.
We've got that. But you and I have gotten over that line where our experience is a lot different than a lot of trans women and trans men in the community. We've gotten over that.
But that's with any community, my friend. That's with any community. There's always going to be a hierarchy in every community.
Absolutely.
You've got to remember the time I've been in this community,
but you
number
don't
one.
have to weaponize that hierarchy against.
How am I weaponizing it?
Let's pause.
Wait,
so let's pause. Yeah,
but I really want to know how I'm weaponizing it.
Yeah.
How?
So
I have listened to a few of your Facebook Lives, and I used to follow you a lot on Facebook. One of my dear black trans sisters who is an activist, you made a remark about her being a monkey.
I would never. That is an actual lie. You need to pull that up.
Truth.
I have never ever said that. Actually, that is insulting. I am insulted. That is racist. That is not okay. I have never. No, I have never said it. Never. Never.
Yeah.
That is a complete total lie. That's upsetting. I'm very upset about that.
So let's pause. So let's pause.
That's basically like I'm saying I said the N-word. That's exactly what that's saying.
Okay, let me
I want proof. I want actual proof.
Yeah.
If someone can look that up right now, I want proof. Alleged. There you go.
Okay, so let's pause.
There
Okay,
you go.
so let's break this down. So if you have an alleged comment and somebody who denies the comment and says absolutely not, this is racist, I think we cannot use that during this debate on this particular issue.
That's right.
To come after the said person on what is being said.
Yeah, but let me just say the comment like this. It was alleged that you called a black
Alleged.
trans woman a
That's
monkey.
right. Okay.
And so, with that being said, because a lot of the black trans girls, because I remember that live, there was a live you did on Facebook, because in the mornings you used to do your lives then, where a lot of the black trans girls would comment and you were very dismissive of them. And so, and the activist that I'm talking about is a very good sister of mine. And
What's
so,
her name?
I'm not gonna do that on here. But,
Okay, so
But then we need.
I think we
need to
should
move on.
swipe. We should move past
to
the
move on.
accusation then, because
That's right.
we're not going to give specific details
That's
or whatever.
right.
And
Yeah.
it's besides the point as to the ideology and the debate
right.
as far
Yeah.
as how this affects people.
Yeah.
I think
Yeah.
the crux of the argument where trans people may get upset with somebody like Buck
Yes.
is what you say about the current ideology that has been ushered in. Now, Blossom, you say that he has an obligation to move forward with the change that happens into the community. The changes in languages, the changes in the way that people are treated, whether or not things are diagnosed as disorders. You say that he should be moving along with the new age version of ideology.
Yeah, so I'm not going to say he has an obligation to it, because this is what I always say around every trans person. Every trans person is their own individual self. They can identify how they want to. If you say you identify as a biological female, you identify as a biological female. I'm not here to police how you view your transness. That's never my ideology. I just want Buck to remember that there is a level of responsibility within having a platform that when you do say what, I know we can't say cuss words on here.
You can say
Go ahead,
cuss
my
words.
friend.
Whatever you say, whatever the you want to say,
Yeah.
just having that disclaimer, but this is what I say. This is not the trans experience or whatever like that. And because the reality of it is, I'm going to tell you what a lot of these entities do. They'll take what you said and deem it the whole trans experience.
Okay, now can I
And-
rebuttal
Yes,
that?
yes, so let's
so
give
on
him
the
time.
flip side of that, I could say the same thing about you. I don't agree with the things that you're putting out in the
Correct.
world that are for the trans community. It's what I'm trying to say is I don't agree with a lot of the, I don't have to get on board with anything, and neither do is a half of the community
said you
that
have to get
actually
on board.
respects what I say. There's a lot of people in this community that respect what I say. They just don't feel empowered enough to say it because they'll get nailed by this community. So I'm not scared of anybody, and I will stand up and I will speak my beliefs
Good.
because it's who
We
I
don't
am
want you to be
and what
afraid.
I want to do in this world.
No one wants
That
you to
being
be
said,
afraid
that
of.
means I don't have to get on board with new language or any of that because it does not reflect me and it doesn't reflect the community that I want to see. That's not the community I want to see.
I mean,
so why now do
but
I
the
have to get on
reality-
board with the change of language, but
Because
you don't?
it's going to be there whether you like it or not.
That's right, and
that's
so
the
am I.
reality of it.
And so am I.
It's going to be there whether you like it or
That's
not.
right.
And people are going to continue to fight you
And so
whether you
am
like it
I.
or not. And
Yes.
that's fine. But the reality of it is the language is not going anywhere. You just got to learn to be mutable to it. It is what it is.
It's interesting. So the interesting thing is conservatives could say the same thing to trans people, and trans people really hate to hear conservatives say our language is not going anywhere and you'll just have to get used to that. Now let's get into some of the language and some of the debates that are happening, because I want to talk about the issues that people are having on the cultural stage of things. Things like bathrooms, things about like trans women in sports. Let's start with the bathroom debate. The conservative position is that trans people should use the bathroom of their biological sex, what they were born as. How do you both feel about this?
Could you imagine if I went to the women's room? Let's start there.
Yes.
So it's a ridiculous statement. Now, there's a lot of nuance here. We need to have a discussion about nuance. It's not so black and white.
Sure.
It's not just like a trans woman can just not go in the women's restroom. That's not true. She should most definitely be going into the women's restroom. Nobody will know. You look like a woman. No one's going to say anything. You're going to go do your business. I'm going to go in the dude's room and do my thing and maybe have some sex. Just kidding. But then you know what I mean. But let's have nuance here. We have a newer generation of self-ID trans people who are not willing to go the path that I, or possibly you, I don't know if you, to pass to look like a man or a woman. And that's why I've never had an issue about using the men's room. But we have a newer generation of people who are identifying as women who don't look like women and have beards and mustaches and don't necessarily want to be conforming to this idea. And that's fine. They should have every right to do that. But they also need to respect 99% of the world, which is cisgender, and will actually, if you've never been in the women's room, which I have because I was a female for half my life. That being said, it is a very much of a safe space on some level. There's a different energy in a woman's room than in a men's room. And so
Absolutely.
that being said, I understand that debate, and I understand why some people aren't comfortable with certain types of transgender people going in. And that's the nuance I think we need to have the discussion about. It's not so
100%.
simple.
So let's name who you're talking about here. You're basically talking about non-binary people.
Well, no, there's trans women who.
necessarily.
That's not true.
But no, but non-binary people can also be included in that though, because the reality of it is, again, transness is not a monolith.
And I do think there is something to be said about what Buck said. If you see somebody like Blair White, a very famous trans woman who looks, by all intents and purposes, like a woman, you would not want Blair White going into a men's bathroom.
That's right.
I mean, that is undeniable. You would not want you going into a men's bathroom,
That's
and I would
right.
not want you going into a women's bathroom. Let's be very clear about that. So, what is to be said for the trans individuals who look like their biological sex? Who
But the reality of it is, trans people should go into the restroom where they individually feel comfortable going in. And I needed to bring up what you were saying about trans women with like mustache and beards, because some of them do identify as non-binary, and some of them tend to go back and forth between the women and the men's restroom. And what I've learned from them is a lot of them there's this issue around safety, where sometimes they feel like they may have to go on this side for their safety or go on that side for their safety. And the reality of it is, it's like, okay, where do we land in the middle around this? And honestly, when it comes to going in the bathroom, I really could give two shits about what you have between your legs. I will go in there and do my business, you go in there and do your business, that's fine. But a lot of conservatives like to weaponize that and try to use it as a talking point to all of a sudden empower themselves. And I feel like it's a lot more of the alt-right, like the really radical right that I see it happens more of, because I feel like when you land more in the middle as a moderate, like the conversation's there, but it's not horrible. Like we can sit here and have a discussion around it, but I think it's really a right-wing talking point, and they've just found a way to really try to weaponize white supremacy against us within this issue, because the reality of it is, again, it's like, why do you care what restroom I go into?
Okay. So let's talk about the conservatives and the accusation of weaponizing the bathroom debate here. I think we do have to talk about real instances of this going wrong and this going awry. And it's not an accusation for the trans community or trans people in particular. It's an accusation for men who utilize these rules to their own advantage, and particularly predatory men. So here in Los Angeles, we had WeSpa. I don't know if you heard about this situation.
Yes.
They said, you know, if you identify as female, you'll go into whatever section you identify with. A man who probably does not identify as trans came to the spa, said, I identify as trans, I would like to go into the women's section, exposed himself to a bunch of women and young girls. And this became a whole problem, which I think is where conservatives' concern lie when it comes to the bathroom. And Buck, I'll have you give your opinion after this. That's where it lies. It might get confused as a weaponization or an accusation about the trans community, when it's really a commentary on our society and men who will use these rules in a predatory manner.
I think they use those rules as a predatory manner to cover their own asses and blame the trans community for something that they had nothing to do with.
But if
the reality of it is, there has not been one trans person that has been out there harming people in the restroom. There just hasn't.
But
a lot of what's happening is it's a lot of these white conservative men who have such a voice about the trans experience and being so anti-trans, but then when their dirt catches up with them, all of a sudden they're the villain, right?
What I see as a problem, to be honest with you, is the self-ID situation, because now anyone can self-ID as trans, and doesn't mean you have to do anything. Yeah. So again, I'm gonna go back to that word nuance. It's so important in this conversation, because it is a problem. I do see a problem when somebody can just identify as trans, take the space that I and possibly you have worked very hard to get into, to be a part of, to understand where we stand in this, and then just some dude is going to go, well, I'm trans and I need to go into the women's prison and I need to get all the benefits that women get. This is a problem. Not only is it a problem for biological women, but it is also a problem for our trans community.
Correct.
It is hurting us. People see this and then they think me and you are a part of that. And I'm like, why do you think I stand up and I speak? I'm like, wait a minute. I lived half my life in a female space. You must understand that. I see things through different eyes than men see or even sometimes women see. I have lived in a dual space, and so that is why I stand up for women's rights, because it is on some level, it has nothing to do with trans rights versus women's rights. It has to do with our rights as people. And if trans people want rights, they also got to look at why other people need rights. It's not a one-way street. It is a two-way street, and we have to help everybody find their space in this whole conversation. It is a mess. It is such a mess that we have to have these arguments about bathrooms, about sports, about all of these things. Things should be inclusive to a certain extent until we figure this out. We need to have trans spaces. Trans spaces will help us.
We cannot ignore the isms around this type of conversation, and that the isms are a big part of the nuances, right?
That's right.
Classism, racism, sexism, narcissism, all of those isms.
Sure.
And I agree with you 100%. You know, the danger of people who do harm being able to self-identify as trans just to be able to deem us immoral and deem us the devil and somehow cover their shit up or whatever. But the reality of it is, again, the trans experience is not a monolith. And I think any person that wants to cause harm to other individuals and then blame and deem themselves as trans just to cover their ass, almost like the shooter at Club Q, who all of a sudden wanted to use they, them pronouns.
But wait a minute. That's not fair. How do you know that person isn't non-binary?
Hold on just a second. Because the reality of it is, first of all, he was only 16. When he was 16, he petitioned a court in Texas to change his name. Okay, number one. Two, he was arrested in June 2021 for a bomb threat, right? And then here you are going into this club and you're shooting up innocent people, right? And you got to live because you're white, clearly. You got to live. Let me wake that up. You got to live because you're white, because if it was a person of color or anybody that did that heinous crime, they'll be shot and killed to death. So first of all, the fact that he's even alive speaks volumes after killing 5 people and injuring over 25 other people.
Okay, so wait, I just really need to talk about the non-binary thing.
Yes.
That is not fair. What I hear from our community is anybody can be non-binary, whether they choose to do it today, tomorrow, whatever. That person's...
But you don't get to identify
No. Yes, you do. Oh, yes, you do. In this community, you do.
So it's
You do not.
I disagree.
There are good and bad non-binary people. There are good and bad trans people.
That's right.
There are good and bad black people, good and bad white
That's
people.
right.
Him going and committing a crime like that does
That's
not
right.
negate the identity of being non-binary.
That's
You
right.
don't get to use the identity.
How do you know he's
after you
using
shut the
it?
club.
How do you know? That is actually being very transphobic
it's
right
not
now.
being transphobic.
Yeah, it is.
Nice dodge, though.
No.
Nice
That's
dodge,
hypocrisy
nice
at its
dodge, bud.
finest.
Nice dodge.
That's hypocrisy.
Nice dodge,
Your
bud.
community
But
literally
listen
says
to
if
what I'm
someone
saying.
chooses to be
So the
non-binary,
reality
then all of a
it
sudden
is-
he's a shooter and now
I
he's
did
not
say that.
non-binary.
I did not say
I
that
disagree with
because
you.
What he said was that, first of all, until when he was arrested and the charges came out, the reason why he's trying to use non-binary is because he's trying to get out of those hate crimes.
How do you know that?
Because the thing
I
is,
disagree.
if it looks like, if I identify as non-binary, I
But
can at
how
least
do
get out
you
of those
know
hate
that?
crime charges.
That's your opinion.
This is my opinion.
It's not
but the reality
facts.
of it is, but how do you know that?
Because the fact
How do
is,
you know
okay,
that?
I'll tell you. The fact is, his attorney said he identifies as non-binary. That's a fact.
After.
Doesn't matter.
After.
It's a fact.
After, honey.
After what?
After the fact
what?
of him being charged.
It doesn't matter. That's his
Exactly.
choice.
No, but
Sorry.
what you're not going to do is villainize.
That's a double
You're not gonna
standard.
sit up here and
That's a double
villainize
standard.
non-binary
That's a
people.
double
But here's
standard.
Here's the issue. Here's
We're
the
not
issue.
gonna sit up here and
Here's the
villainize
issue.
non-binary.
Okay.
Yes,
So-
I'm not villainizing anybody. I'm respecting their choice of identity.
Right.
That's what you all say. Respect people's choices. I'm respecting that person's choice to be non-binary. So why aren't you?
So you would do that with a killer.
I would do it with anybody.
Wow.
I'm not saying he killed. I'm not saying it's good that he killed. It's disgusting. But yes, I will give that person their identity choice.
Let's ask you a question, Blossom. Let's ask you a question.
I don't understand.
Okay, I am biracial, okay?
Correct.
If I go downstairs and I shoot 5 people, am I no longer a biracial woman? Does that negate my identity?
Let me tell you something. I'm going to be more concerned on the fact that you killed 5 people versus you being biracial.
But does it change my identity?
It does not change your identity, but this is what I'm saying, and this is what I'm trying to get to you to understand, is I don't really care about the fact that he is identifying as XYZ and the other thing or whatever. This person went and killed 5 people in an LGBTQ nightclub where the next day was supposed to be Trans Day of Remembrance. I don't give 2 shits about whether he identifies as trans, non-binary, da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da. I'm sorry. This person went and killed 5 people. And going back to what you said about people being able to self-identify, right? Mm-hmm. And it being harmful to our trans community. I believe by him identifying as non-binary after he has shot and killed people, it's going to cause detrimental harm to our community. Because I feel like if he had led with it being non-binary, we'd be talking about a whole different topic. And you're right, it does not change who he is or whatever like that.
Okay.
But I want you to remember, that kind of harm right there is going to hurt. It will hurt non-binary people. It will hurt our community as a whole. Because let's also be clear, not all non-binary people identify as trans, okay? So let me make sure I wake that up and make sure I call in that nuance as well, too. But I do not like the fact that you get to that you get to go and murder innocent people, and then all of a sudden you want to make this big deal about what the hell your pronouns are. What about the lives you went and shot
can I
and
speak
killed?
now?
Yes,
Because so I get what you're saying, my friend, but guess what happens? When you institute self-ID, now this is the mess that has gotten us into. Because we, as a community, anyone can be non-binary. The minute somebody chooses that identity choice, all of a sudden now they're not non-binary, and that mother killed 5 people. It's disgusting. I don't care what his identity is. He's disgusting, gross, whatever. The fact still lies that he chose the identity of non-binary. We all in our community not only owe it to our community, but owe it to the world to have the discussion and not bury it. Because if you notice on television now, it's nowhere to be found. Yep. Nowhere to be found.
I don't disagree with you. So
how does that make us look as a community?
But I think what we're doing unintentionally is we're waking up a conversation that kind of needs to be had in our community around being able to self-identify. And when things in situations like this happen, what does that really look like? I don't think we're disagreeing far too much. I think that it's time for us to really have this conversation in our community around self-identifying and how dangerous it can become.
That's right.
When something like this happens.
That's right.
So the issue is that many are not allowing that conversation to be had. That's and they are saying all must be respected. You can be whatever you want on any given day. I see people on the internet who say my gender changes based on the day. Yeah. Sometimes I go by he, him. Sometimes I go by she or her. Correct. They, them. And we've allowed this to just grow and morph into something that is far beyond a medical disorder that many deal with and struggle with. Here's the thing. And it's interesting. I want to speak to your experience. Have you been attacked by people in the trans community at all? Do they come at you?
Absolutely.
And what for?
Absolutely. They'll come after me for my platform. They will come after me. Because let me tell you something. I deal with a lot of anti-blackness within our trans community. You know what I'm saying? And I experienced that a lot from the Latina trans girls, to be quite honest with you. You know what I mean? Like white supremacy and colonization, all of these things have plagued our community. And it's tried to deem one group superior than the other. And that's not true. And the reality of it is, though, I come from the Deep South. I'm from Mississippi, so I'm not even cut from the same cloth as a lot of these California girls are. Let's just be very clear on where I come from. I was literally born in a town that was only 10 minutes away from where the body of Emmett Till was found, in Greenwood, Mississippi. He was killed in Money, Mississippi. So I'm not even cut from the same cloth. But the reality of it is I've dealt more with anti-blackness than I have pure racism from white people back home. Okay, and it's not just, it's just not the Latina trans girls. It's also I've dealt with this from Armenian folks, the Asian community here, some of them as well. So there's a lot of microaggressions that go into play, and if you don't look a certain aesthetic, you get that, and I'm okay with that because let me tell you something. One thing about me, I'm always stand in my power. I'm always stand in my potential, and I don't let words hurt me. And people here do not like the fact that I speak my voice, that I know who I am, and that I am not afraid to push back against authority, because if within that authority, if it's upholding transphobia, homophobia, xenophobia, and all of these other things, of course I'm going to speak out, because I have every right to hold my leaders accountable. I have every right to be held accountable for my actions as well, just as you do, as well as you do. And I have no problem doing that. But I will say this. It's taken me a long time to get to that point. It's a process, and you have to build on that foundation.
Okay, interesting. So it seems as though the hate that you get from the trans community is not necessarily based around your gender identity.
Absolutely not.
Whereas with Buck, you get lots of hate based around your identity. Speak to that and talk about your struggle with that.
Well, my struggle with that is that I sort of stand in the middle. My politics are very middle ground. My way of living is very middle ground. I think the things I speak about that have to deal with the trans community versus the women's community, that's mostly the voice I talk about. So then we have, what they call the gender critical females who come after me. You're just a woman. They love to the thing is, I've grown a thick skin. I mean, doing this for a long time, you can't not grow a thick. You can either become a crybaby and do that, or you can just become, I know what I'm saying, and it doesn't hurt my feelings, because words are just words.
Yeah.
So really where it gets to be a little difficult is being in a middle space and, really saying, well, look, this is how I feel as this type of person, and these are the things I fight for. But the hate I get can be, literally, kill yourself, we're coming at you. Right. You can't dox me because I'm like, here, you can have my address. I'll meet you at Starbucks. I'm not scared. I'm just not. So I think that insanity has dissipated a little bit, because as you see, I'm willing to go on any show. I will go on any show. I will debate anybody. I will have the conversation. And I think on some level it's created respect for me, where I used to get a lot more hate, but now I have this sort of respect that at least Buck will have the conversation.
Right. Yeah. Okay. Well, let's move on to...
I'll give you that.
Let's move on to another piece of conversation here. Here's the statement. Trans women should not compete in female sports.
I want to hear his opinion on that.
Sure. I think everyone knows my opinion. So yes, I do not believe trans women should be competing in female sports at this time. So I do think eventually we might be able to move forward in that. But, from the biological standpoint and from all of my research on it, and also being a female athlete, I was a professional female athlete, and I ran in the 80s against the USSR, which basically those women could have been trans dudes. They would come on there like this with a mustache. I'm not even kidding. I'm like, are you kidding? So I come from the steroid days.
Okay, fair enough.
Anyway, I do have actual real lived experience in that. And so I do not believe that it is a fair space. And sports is about fairness. That's why you call sportsmanship, all of those things. It's a very difficult conversation, and it's not me saying trans women don't belong. It's me saying, no, we need to figure it out. And for the time being, I don't think that women should be pushed to the side so that one trans woman could come in and compete and basically rip the whole system apart. So
this is what me and you...
We did debate about this. Yes, we did.
Went just like this about this topic. And it was actually a really good conversation. And so I feel grateful to even be having this conversation again, because the first time I felt like there were things I just left out. And I was like, shoot, I should have said that.
Sure.
But I do believe, of course, that trans women should be able to compete in sports with cis women. And the reality of it is, number one, you don't know the genetic composition of a person. You just don't know. Because there are some cisgender women who look masculine, who are also stronger than trans women, who may have longer legs, longer arms. If a cisgender woman grew up and, they had access to a trainer, you know what I mean? They may be trained to be able to run faster than some transgender women. You know what I mean? You just don't know that. I just think society looks at the whole binary. Oh, this trans woman was once, this is what they say, was once a man, so of course she's going to always have the agility that a cisgender woman can't. Well, there are some cisgender women who have higher level of testosterone, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I also think we have to be very careful that cisgender women aren't affected in such a negative way, because the reality of it is, if a cisgender woman does look masculine, she may go through scrutiny, going through all of these different tests, going through all of these different things, just to see if she can have to prove her womanhood to be able to compete in women's sports. And I think sometimes we forget the domino effect of how everybody can actually be impacted by that. And I don't think that's fair to any woman that has to go through that. Trans women, cis women, I don't care. And I just really think that we have to begin to wake that up. Now, let's be 100% real about this. If trans people were to get their own sports arena, was to get their own, spaces around sports, would people really tune in to see a bunch of trans people compete against each other?
Honestly, it might be the hottest event of the year.
So, actually. I'd take it.
I think people will watch that.
Well, first of all, thank you for your support of it. But let's be real, y'all. Let's be real as society. Society as a whole is not going to really give a damn. They're not going to turn on NBC to see a bunch of trans people competing against each other. I'm sorry. They're just
There's not even enough athletes to do that.
Yeah, there's not.
There's not enough
but let's break down.
Yeah.
We gotta. So just because a case might not be that the U.S. would not tune in to watch something like that, does that mean that we have to place biological women at a disadvantage in a sport that is meant to represent them?
I disagree. It's not a disadvantage.
Well, so let's talk about that. And you gave your points there. So there are rules and there are exceptions to the rule. There are plenty of exceptional women who are in many ways stronger or faster than biological men, but they are exceptions to the rule that men are stronger. They have more bone density, more lung capacity, larger hands, larger
feet. It goes back to the individual self, though. See, that's the thing, though. You don't know somebody's genetic composition unless every individual person, unless you actually know what their genetic composition is, because that's not all true. Not every man has stronger bone density. But not every man.
But we're
has
talking
faster
statistics.
agility.
We're talking statistics.
We're talking statistics.
But see, this is what we. You know what I'm saying? Statistics is like if you cannot actually name the statistic and the reference that it comes from, I'm sorry. I can't.
But we can.
Yeah.
But we can't. And secondly, I just want to reiterate, I was a professional female athlete.
I understand
Were you a
that.
professional athlete ever? Were you in athletics
was not.
prior to transition?
I was not.
Okay, so I was. So you have to understand, I have actual experience in this. There are definitely some women who are much stronger, much faster, but that is such a small
Women
amount.
meaning cis women, right?
I'm talking about, yes,
Biological.
cisgender
Okay.
women.
Yeah,
Yes,
sure.
biological women. Yeah.
I'm gonna say cis woman.
Well, I'm going to say biological.
That's
So
fine.
I had a different.
No, that's fine.
That's
No,
okay. We have different
my audience
words.
that watches, I'm like,
That's right.
cis
That's
woman.
all good.
Sure.
I don't. My friends don't like cis, so I use
That's
biological. That being said, I do believe that men and women, biological men and women, have differences. It's the reason why we segregated sports from the beginning.
Yes.
If sports wasn't segregated from the beginning, then we wouldn't even be having this conversation. But as a professional female athlete, I can tell you that I even ran against the guys and kicked their ass, but I was that exceptional athlete. That being said, there was not one other woman in my arena that could even touch me or be around that. I'm an exception to that rule.
So it's so funny that you said that, because I was actually thinking about this morning on my way here about why sports is so segregated.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? Why you have to have the WNBA who gets paid a lot less than the folks that work at the
Well, they're
NBA.
changing that, by the way.
You know what I mean?
Yeah, they're changing women's
they're changing
sports
it now, but it's been happening for so
Yeah,
long.
well, change takes time.
And change takes time, but it's like it shouldn't have to happen in
But
the
it
first
did
place.
happen. That's the most
A lot of
important
times we're
part.
reacting
Change
to
did
that.
happen.
Let's pause. So let's break. Well, you said the WNBA versus the NBA. Let's
Correct.
look at the stats of these women versus the stats of
Right
the men.
on.
How often is a WNBA player
Yeah.
running down the court and dunking a basketball? There are a few that can, but many are not, because women do not meet the same standard as men. I recently just went to a golf course with my boyfriend. They have the men's base where they hit. They have a women's base where they hit, and a kids base, and you'll find that the women's is many yards before the man's. It is because women don't have the same capacity typically that men do.
But listen to this, though. The reality of it is a lot of women in the WNBA have to go to foreign countries to be able to play because of the pay rate. Look at Brittany
Sure.
Griner now. Look at
But
Brittany
that does
Griner
not
now.
speak to her
But
strength.
But the reality of it is the reason why she was over there in Russia to begin with was because the pay was higher for her to play basketball there than it is in America.
Sure.
And so the reality of it is it's a very unfair advantage that women in the WNBA are treated less than, are paid less than, in the same sport, let's be very clear, in the same sport that men who are in the NBA get to play as well.
But that's
too.
across the board.
Yes.
That's across the board. Corporate women do not get paid the same as corporate men.
I will always, as a black trans woman, wake that up. I have to wake that up.
The wage debate is a very different debate than the strength and physical capacity
it's a part
debate.
Of it. It's also a part of it, too. We cannot ignore that nuance within that. I'm not.
Can I bring up Caitlyn Jenner, who also agrees with me and says, Caitlyn also agrees that trans women should not be competing in women's sports.
Sure.
She's a trans woman.
Right.
So there are trans women. Not just her. There are many trans women who disagree with trans women being in women's sports.
Really, because Caitlyn Jenner was on the Wheaties box. Let's be clear, and let's be clear what Caitlyn's.
But she's a professional athlete.
Let me be very clear to what Caitlyn's relationship was with me. You know what I mean? She was the whole reason why I ended up on the Ellen Show. So my relationship with her is going to be a lot different than a lot of people. And to be very clear, even as a black trans woman, I will have a very much more advantage because Caitlyn helped me get $20,000 on the Ellen Show. You know what I mean? She made my dreams come true. And the reality of it is, and I've never really talked about this in public before, but the reality of it is just because you've helped somebody does not mean that you get to basically crap on the trans community.
She's not crapping. It's her opinion. That's unfair.
Let me tell you something.
That is unfair.
No, this is what she said.
I don't care what she's allowed to say it. You're saying stuff that she disagrees with. So what if she says no? Because the thing is this.
She actually said that she felt like the trans community turned her back on her. Now, as a life coach, when I think of that, I think of, okay, there needs to be some healing involved. And a lot of people will disagree with me on this because they will feel like, because she did this for you, you owe this back to her. Let me be very clear, Buck, very clear around this. No trans person, no matter what they feel, say, should be left behind. I don't care how rich you are. I don't care how poor you are. I do not believe in leaving a trans person behind because of their wealth. Let me be clear on that, number one. Number two, she came into this game at 65. All right? And so that's right around your experience. And so being able to live the first 65 years of your life as something else and then transitioning later in life, I can only imagine. Okay? So I have more grace and compassion around that. And you've been in the game a lot longer. And so the thing is, she is allowed to have her opinion, yes, but we are also allowed to criticize
That's
her
right,
opinion.
100%.
Sure, that's what's happening.
That's right. That's right.
If I'm allowed to criticize her opinion,
she's also allowed to criticize you.
She's not above accountability.
Whatever that means.
But let's talk here, because there's a difference between opinion and science. And I mean, the science is very much definitive. There is a massive. There is. I mean, nowadays with how the scientific community is running and the amount of censorship, there might not be much of a difference between science and opinion because so many scientists are censored when it comes to these issues. But we've known for all of human existence that men are stronger and have more physical capacity than women. That's why men are the hunters and women are the gatherers. That's
been the societal constructive.
But if I go down to the street and I pick 100 men and 100 women and I say, fight each other right now, or play tug of war, something like that, who is going to win? The men are going to win. Statistically, we know this to be true. There will be anomalies of very strong women and things like that. And Caitlyn Jenner has everything to gain by saying, put trans women in female sports. She could be dominating in golf. She could be dominating in swimming. She could be dominating in running. But she doesn't.
Now, let's talk about trans men.
No, wait. Before we get
hold
on, but before we get to that, let me just say this or whatnot. And I think that we've talked about this before. Science and personal experience are two different things because the science books doesn't always catch up with personal experience. So let's be very clear around that. Because even when we talk about this language and pronouns and stuff like that, it hasn't caught up yet. It's gonna get there eventually. And so that's why when we talk about science, science is forever evolving. Science is forever changing. It doesn't stay in one place.
That's not
necessarily true.
I am in spaces, and I can't talk about this out loud or whatever. I'm in spaces where I've had to look at research. And when looking at the research, it's like, okay, because our identities are much more specific, I would say, Like, of course, our identities are expanding, but in research, it's a lot different because in science, you have to be much more specific. This is the particular group I need to talk about. And when we talk about like non-binary, it's like, okay, who are we talking about? Are we talking about non-binary people who identify as trans or non-binary people that don't? You know what I'm saying? Like things like that. And so I would just say there's a cognitive dissonance within science that still needs to be worked out around it. So go ahead, I'm sorry.
Yeah, I would disagree about the cognitive dissonance in science. I think
fine.
it's very cut and clear, though, as far as men and their physical advantages, where women have other advantages. We know this.
We never agree on that.
You wanted to speak about trans men. Okay, so let's talk about the flip side of that, because it's so often the conversation is trans women in female sports, so biological men playing against biological females. We're never talking about the women transitioning to men, which right now, with trans-identifying people, is the vast majority.
That's right.
Girls choosing to identify
girls,
as... Yes.
not women.
Yes, it is girls.
Young girls.
Yes. So talk about that in
well,
trans
I mean,
men.
that we'll get to next. But
yes, we'll get to next.
The sports thing. So the sports thing, how come we don't hear about trans? And I have friends who are trans male athletes who compete against biological men at universities who do really great. They're nowhere near the top of the list of the men. Yep. And the reason why, and I asked men this, would you feel uncomfortable for me competing? They would laugh at me. What, dude? I'm not a threat. I am in no way, shape, or form a threat to the fastness, to the strength of it. And I'm pretty strong, and I'm very good shape for my age, for a 60-year-old. Yeah. But that being said, I'm not a threat because I never was as strong as them. Even with all the testosterone I take and all the workout I do, I'm still not going to be at the level of them. So that's what we also need to see. The reason why that conversation is mostly about trans women and women's spaces is because it does create an unfair playing field. I don't create an unfair playing field for men, and that's the reality of the situation. Because my biology.
Can we unpack that?
Sure, my biology.
So why around that? And not just biology, but why besides biology?
Well, also social. It's also society.
Okay.
Society. Women. I've lived as a woman, and I'll keep repeating that. It is scary out there in the world as a woman, right? It is scary. Sometimes you walk down scary hallways. I've been beaten up. I've been raped. I've been all kinds of things as a female, which have never happened to me as a man. So that being said, my lived experience does see that women have a different way of being in the world. They have to be much more guarded. They have to be much more aware of things. So I think men aren't fearful of me because they see me as a biological female and they see me as not a threat. Does that make sense?
It absolutely makes sense. And in that we have to acknowledge the biological reason why men would view it that way.
It's why biology matters in this conversation, and I will completely keep saying. And I get it. You're completely. That is 100% okay that you disagree. But I need to finish my thought here. I want to finish my thought. Yeah. So that being said, that's why biology is so important to me as a transsexual person. When I talk to the world that I'm a biological female, guess what people say? Oh, dude, wow, that's so cool. Right on. You fixed yourself. Nobody has an issue with me because I'm actually living in my reality. And my reality says, this is how I was. This is how I am. I don't want to have any problems with anybody in the world. I just want to walk the world as a dude. If I don't lie to you and I don't, and I'm not telling you that I never was a female, I wasn't born that way, that makes you look at me like, what, dude? Like, what are you talking about? And you're not going to respect me on, this is my own experience, 30 years being open about who and what I am, that people listen to me and people have no issues with me as a transsexual person.
Right.
Because of my reality of honesty.
And see, I've never tried to take that away from you. And I'm not saying you're accusing me of doing that. I've never tried, I don't want to take away anybody's personal experience of how they identify. If that's what empowers you, Buck,
that's right.
That's fine. But you always, the reality of it is we have to remember every action will always have a reaction. And what I was saying to you earlier was also just think about the reaction behind that too, because it's like, damn, there's going to be people, number one, who look up to you, and that's fine, or people who may live a similar experience as you, and they, of course, cannot get away with those talking points as you. And that was the only thing I wanted to bring was conscious awareness around that. I don't want to take away anything from your experience. And I've had to have this conversation with some of my dear friends about you and about how you identify. Because again, the trans experience is not a monolith. And you also have to remember, he comes from a totally different time frame than a lot of us millennials and Gen Zers do. And so a lot of millennial and Gen Zers were not exposed to that. I was, as far as like using transvestite, transsexual, and all of this other stuff or whatever. But the reality of it is, until we get to a place where we're all able to share these different experiences, then that's the case. But when you say that, and I think this is where a lot of it is coming from, there are people that feel hurt and condemned by that because just because that's your one experience, people in power and people who have access are going to deem them that same thing.
But
and
you just said the trans community is not a monolith.
It's not a monolith.
So let me
reevaluate. Let me finish. Because when you bring that back around or whatever, we're still on the same page. Because again, because the trans experience is not a monolith or whatever, it should not be put, your experience should not be put on other people who do not identify the same way.
Then
but
they need to speak up.
But the society, everybody doesn't have the access.
But that's not my problem. That is not my problem.
It's not your problem. And
that's
let
right.
me tell you something.
It's not my problem.
Let's be clear.
I don't like the way they represent me. No. I don't like the way they represent me. So I represent myself.
I never said that is your problem, that is my problem. You know what I'm saying? I only want to bring conscious awareness to it. Awareness is the key word here.
Okay.
That's literally what I'm saying. I'm not victim blaming you or shifting blame.
No,
or
I don't think
like
that.
Or whatever.
I don't think that at all.
But I'm the type of person, if we don't bring conscious awareness to these different points of view or whatever, we won't know that it exists. And so that's the only thing I'm saying is sometimes when we say the things that we say or whatever, we don't see the unintentional harm around it. Although it may not be our problem and people should be able to do that or whatever, because we come from a much more smaller community, it does hurt us a lot more that if you were to say something like this, I don't think you would affect the cis I'll say cis woman community, I'll say cisgender community because you're bigger.
Okay, we're gonna move on to another point here. Unless you have anything else to say on the sporting issue. Anything else?
I think we've said what we need to say.
Okay, anything else to debate? We're gonna get into an even hotter one now. Okay, here's the statement: kids should not be able to transition. Take it away, either of you, whoever wants to jump in.
I think for me, there has to be a lot of education and understanding around it, especially with the parents. The reality of it is, to these people who are not raising these kids, it's not your place. It's not your place, first of all, to say what somebody else's child can and cannot do. And the reality of it is, I don't police people's parenting skills, okay? But I do think that, and I'm thinking, when I think of topics like this, I think of the Lizette Trujillos, the Jodie Pattersons, the Jeanette Jennings, all of these mama bears to their trans kids. And the reality of it is, they've gone through so much criticism, not from their own, but a lot more of outside people who ain't got no business raising their child or telling them how to raise their child and what's going on in there. Now, around education, I think it's very, very important that the child understands, hey, the way society is, this is what is going to happen. I know if I was a parent of a child that wanted to transition, I would sit my child down and be like, look, this is what it is, okay? I'm not going to sugarcoat it because if you don't teach your kid, the world will teach your kid. And I don't want that. I want to prepare my child for the world. I'll be like, look, this is what the hormones can do for you, can do to you. You may get bullied, da-da-da-da-da-da. I'm willing to lay all of that out for my child.
Okay. Buck.
Well, medicalization of children, I do not agree with. Now, the question was transitioning. Was trans children?
So we'll make the difference there. You've got social transitioning, which is saying socially, I will acknowledge you as the gender you've chosen. We'll say that's acceptable. People will do that regardless of what you say. There's no law there.
That's right.
Let's talk about medical transition.
I am 100% against medicalization of children under the age of 18. Okay. The reason I am is because, I will say that I used to be pro. I used to be pro-transitioning medically children, and I used to think it was an amazing idea until more research started happening, and I started to actually do my due diligence and really dig deep into the information and realizing, oh my gosh, this actually isn't what it seems on paper. And so that a lot of that changed my mind, as well as, we shut down a lot of the things in other countries that have been doing it for a lot longer than we have. And so for me, I was like, why are we in such a hurry to transition a child? I have a child, by the way. I'm a parent. And so I'm a soccer coach and a referee.
I love it.
I'm that dude. But my not that makes me any better than anybody. I'm just telling you that my experience on a daily basis is around children. And so I don't necessarily think a child will 100% benefit from the medicalization because we don't know the long-term effects. We are also choosing for that child. And I will tell you, my parents were amazing. When I was growing up in the 60s and 70s, my parents, dressed me like a little boy, like Buck. I grew up that way, which we used to call tomboy. And I had I did not have a bad childhood. I had an awesome childhood.
Yes.
So that being said, I'm just saying from my own experience and seeing, I know children change their mind on a daily basis. And in an hour, they change their mind.
They do.
And so to really put a child into a position of something that is irreversible, I have a problem with that.
I disagree with
but that's
it being
okay.
a choice because we're not choosing for the child. The child is choosing for themselves. And what's happening here is the parents are being criticized for supporting their child on their choice. Now, again, going back to what I was saying now, it may be necessary for a child to medically transition. It may be necessary if they're suicidal, because we do know that trans youth have a high rate when it comes to suicide. And I think it's very important that when we talk about gender dysphoria, going back, because ultimately this is what this is, ultimately the nuance around this is gender dysphoria when you're so young. How do you deal with it? Some people are able to socially transition without having to go the medical way, and that be fine. But for some children, trans youth, that gender dysphoria could be even detrimental to them and their being at the moment. And so the only choice they may have is to medically transition. Now, I really strongly believe that education is so important and research is so important to make sure that this procedure is right for your child. But the parent is not choosing from it, because let's be clear, as a black person growing up, I certainly would not have been able to transition at a young age in my mama's household. What? As the oldest child? What? No, let me tell you something about me. I had to move out my side of my mama's house when I was like 21 to begin my transitioning, because I knew it was not allowed in her home. So that's why I strongly disagree about parents choosing that for their child. I think it goes back to experience. But the reality of it is, it's like, okay, there's a lot more resources available now than it was when you were a child and I myself as a child, as a trans person. Let's just be clear. I will always say that this Gen Z generation has it a lot easier than we did. They have cell phones, they have their laptops, all this other stuff or whatever. We didn't have that growing up. You know what I mean? We were the last generation. Oh, you're Gen Z too, aren't you? I was about to say, in my head, I think you're a millennial. But like the millennials, we were like the last generation when it comes to the rotary phone, seeing that generation. So it's like there's a lot more privilege and access to these things now. But if I was younger now, back then, I would definitely medically transition if I had the willpower, the access, and the parents that would allow me to do that. Okay. So let me just make sure I name that.
That's because you're an adult now and you understand that. So,
Correct.
Right. So now a child doesn't necessarily know that. Now, I also want to bring up detransitioners.
Yes.
We have a large amount of contrary to what this community says, we have a large amount of detransitioners that I interview them on a daily basis. So that being said, some of those detransitioners were children who were put on puberty blockers and put on hormones, and who did say that they should have never been put that way. They also say their parents were sort of pushed into this space without being given an opportunity to maybe have an alternate idea of what they could do for this child. Yep. So there's a lot going on here. I don't think it's just black and white. I do think we need to slow down, and I do think that there are irreversible consequences to these drugs, and that's a fact.
Yes.
There is small genital growth, which is also a fact, which happens to be a problem if a person either decides not to go forward, and also there's sexual dysfunction. Yep. Now, sex, as you know, I work in that field, and I believe in sex, and sex really helped me connect to my body in a way that I never would have been able to connect to, and it's been a freeing experience for me. So I believe in really educating around sexual stuff. But if you're putting a person into a space where they're never going to have orgasms or ever going to have a sexual lifestyle, how are we making that choice for this person?
I would not want to reduce this conversation down to genitalia, but I will go back to detransitioning, because part of it also too is around safety. I've witnessed trans people that I love near and dear that have had to detransition to find work, to find housing, because depending on where you live, especially coming like from the conservative South, a lot of them have had to do that. Now the resources are a little bit better because there's more nonprofit organizations, more grassroots organizations on the ground that are doing the work to make those resources happen. But I just remember coming up that a lot of folks had to detransition because they just couldn't find work. They couldn't find, you know what I mean? Like they couldn't find the necessary basic resources for their living. I just really, it's a very nuanced conversation around that because again, you don't know the child's experience. You don't know what the child is going through. Yes. And the thing is, I think a lot of people only see through veneers when it comes to this types of conversation, and they're not really looking at the whole aesthetic of it. And I think that's where we have to begin to get to. Because if you sat down and you asked Jeanette Jennings, Lizette Trujillo, and all of these other moms of trans kids, and, I think we'll begin to have more of an understanding of everything.
But the interesting thing is, so you bring up Jazz Jennings'
yes.
Mother, and you view Jazz Jennings as a success story.
I do. I know her mom. I've met them. They're so kind. They're so sweet, and I do view them as a success story. But you also cannot be remiss of all of the horrible things that Jazz went through along the way.
Yeah, but Jazz now in a body that is outwardly female presenting, you would never confuse her for a man. A day in your life is dealing with severe depression, severe anxiety, lack of all sexual feeling whatsoever, and is very open about this, morbidly obese, and is dealing with a slew of other comorbidities as far as psychological disorders, even though her mother started saying that she was trans, at like 2 years old. There is a conversation to be had about
the conversation.
But there's a conversation to be had around young people, say 12, 13, we're going through that stage of puberty and you are feeling gender dysphoric in your body, which is very common for young people to look in the mirror and not like what they see when hormones are rushing. But I do not care what anybody says. A 2-year-old, a 3-year-old, as Dwayne Wade is now saying about his son, they are not communicating gender dysphoria.
So this is the thing. And I'm going to go back to the whole Black experience, because if we don't talk about race within this, we will be remiss. Because, again, there's a certain privilege that Jeanette and Jazz has that, again, on a lot of Black families, we wouldn't see. Now, let's be clear.
Is a person
let's
of color.
be real, though. Let's be real. In a Black family, if a 3-year-old Black child says, I want to transition. Let's be clear.
I want to pause you there. How does a 2-year-old or a 3-year-old communicate that they want to gender transition? I would love to know how that is communicated at that age.
But so here's the thing, and this is where I was going with that. Now, just knowing the aesthetic of the Black family, the Black dad, you have to be this and that. You can't be anything deemed feminine or whatever. Like, we don't want that gay shit in our house or whatever. Let's just be clear. That's how some of the Black families grow up.
How does a child communicate that?
From what I understand is kids, they have their own unique way of doing it. But I'm just giving this an example. This is just literally an example. You know what I mean? Being in a Black household, and if a 3, 4, 5-year-old Black child says, I want to transition, do you really think that Black mom or Black dad is really going to let that happen? Absolutely not. And that's because we understand of what goes on in the Black culture and how being trans is still a taboo topic within the Black community. I talk about this all the time in my platform. I discuss this all the time. So there's also this level of understanding that a Black trans child is not going to have the same as Jazz and Jeanette.
It would be situational. Dwayne Wade's child is Black and is transitioning currently publicly.
But with money and privilege.
Sure, but to get into the race debate, it takes away from the heart of the argument, and that is how are 2-year-olds and 3-year-olds that these parents say are communicating gender dysphoria. How does a 2-year-old or a 3-year-old communicate with that? I don't know how many 2-year-olds or 3-year-olds you've been around, but they do not communicate very complex ideas about identity. A 2-year-old boy might like to wear a ballerina's tutu or play with Barbie dolls.
I think in Jazz's situation, she said she wanted to be a girl, if I'm not mistaken. I have to go research that or whatnot.
Which little boys and little girls will say all the time. Yeah. I would go to kindergarten and be like, boys are so cool, I want to be a boy.
So you're bringing up something that needs to be a little bit more discussed when it comes to being a parent around that. You know what I'm saying? Like being a parent, but just you know what I mean? Like for me, if I was a parent and my child came to me wanting to transition, I think because of my experience and what I've gone through, knowing how I had to hide in the closet for so many years from my parents of transitioning, I would want that to be easier for my child. But I know every child does not get that. And I understand what you're actually saying, and you know what I mean? Because a lot of parents, especially in the black household, they'll be like, I ain't trying to hear that. When you're 18 and grown, you can do whatever you want to do. Sure. That's always been the thing. But this is where we have to begin to start paying attention when those children do come and say that, and then the parents are willing to accept that. So that's something that I can't really answer because
I want to interject in there.
Sure,
so
absolutely.
I get a lot of emails from parents. I mean, hundreds.
I bet.
Help us. We don't know what to do. There's not a lot of organizations because most of the organizations will say transition your children, which, as you know, I'm not 100% okay with that.
Right.
So there are newer organizations happening now that have a much more understanding of your child is your child. You need to figure this out. Is not the rest like everybody else.
Can I
Every
also
child.
say, just to your point, that with some places you have to be a certain age in order to
That's
start
right.
doing that. So let me just say that.
So the parents are struggling with this without any resources. The only resources they have are transition your child or your
Right.
child will kill themselves.
Right.
That's the only thing. And I, again, disagree with that. You're pushing a parent into a corner. So, and as a parent who's somebody around children, I also see how detrimental that can be to a parent's psyche. When you're telling your child that they're going to kill themselves or that they're trans and you have to do this, of course you're going to do it. There's no ifs, ands, or buts. But I also want to reiterate my detransitioner stories. Not one detransitioner ever told me they had to detransition because they couldn't get a job or that they
Right.
and I have over
Were they
150.
white?
I have black detransitioners.
Okay, I need to see
Yeah.
the receipts.
Oh,
on
sure,
that.
sure,
Show me the
100%.
receipts.
Oh,
I-
100%.
I'm a receipt
There are
girl.
many of all races.
Of all
creeds.
races, 100%, my friend. So that, and you can just go to my YouTube channel and you'll see everything there. So that being said, they all said that they were literally kind of sucked into this space, and once this is the key to my interviews that I have found to be totally the same with all of them, is once they removed themselves from the community, they realized and they had time to think about what were they doing and why were they doing this, and that they felt pushed into it by other people within the community. And I'm like, what? So there is some sort of social contagion, and there is this idea that transitioning a child at an early age, they won't go through the same dysphoria that I went through, which again, I'm going to completely disagree.
And that's not
I
all
agree. Disagree
trans
as well.
youth. Let's be very clear. That is not all trans youth. That experience right there, you know what I mean? God bless those souls right there. And I think it's very important to have a space to have conversation around that as well, because we cannot leave no parts of this out. But that's not the entire... That's not what all trans you go through that do detransition.
Sure.
Of
Let's
course.
be clear.
Of course.
But the majority
Yeah.
of children who express gender dysphoria grow out of that gender
That's right.
dysphoria. So why are we giving more voice to people who are just blindly affirming their gender and medically transitioning than we are to the majority of people who realize, oh, I grew through that.
I don't agree that it's the majority, but
It is.
I do think that does exist. Let me make sure I say that. I don't think we can put a number around that, but you're correct. There are children that do grow out of it, and that's fine. But then there are children that don't. And so what do we do
Very
there?
few. Very
And
few
so,
children.
You know, I just, because, well, the trans community itself is small. The population of trans youth is smaller. So that's the only reason why I feel like putting a number on that is it doesn't really serve its purpose, because again, and I wish I had the statistics of like the population of the trans community, like the actual percentage number, and
Sure.
then be able to throw that so we could really use that.
But
But I understand what you're saying. Let me be clear. I understand what you're saying.
And it sounds very similar to the conversation that we're having around sports. We know by and large that men are stronger than women. Therefore, men should not be able to compete against women. We know by and
all,
large.
not all.
We know by and large. Yes, but not all. Not all. We know by and large that most children grow out of their gender dysphoria, but not all. So why are we giving more voice to the but not all than we are to the majority?
Because that's erasure, and that's the
It's
problem
not.
there. It is erasure, because this is the thing. Why would we not want to give attention to that? Why can we not study that? Because the reality of it is, if we can't study it, we wouldn't have stories like what Buck is saying.
But it's being studied.
Right. So study is different.
Study is different.
No.
Yeah.
I'm not just talking about the science and the research. I'm talking about the actual experience and bringing this into the conversation and into these spaces.
Well, we are.
Because the reality of it, no, but I'm just saying in general. I'm not talking about.
No, but in general, if you look, I'm going to tell you as an elder trans person, I have never seen so much trans conversation in my life. It's literally the topic of the world.
That's what we want.
Of course.
And that's what we continue to want, because for so long, let's be clear.
But you just said it wasn't.
Even in your generation, the erasure was very, very real. Marsha P. Johnson, Sylvia Rivera, so many trans, Miss Major Griffin. In your generation, even you could probably even attest to your own erasure within that.
That's right.
So let's be clear.
Right.
And let me make that point right there, because from there to now, we are much more visible now, where you're able to come and say how you feel, where I'm able to come and say how I feel.
But that's...
You say that the trans experience is not a monolith.
Correct.
Okay, but within the scientific community, it very much is.
That's
a kid goes and expresses gender dysphoria, and they immediately tell them you need to transition.
That's
it is very literally a monolith.
The science has not fully caught up with the trans experience.
But it has in Germany, Finland, Sweden, France. It has.
Honey, there are new identities. People identify new that a lot of us don't
exactly why I
understand.
disconnect from that, and I'm a transsexual. That's why.
Hold on just a second.
Yeah.
There are a lot of new identities that are still being evolved and put out there.
Identities.
Identities, pronouns.
Yes.
Not binary.
All of those things. All of those things.
Not gender dysphoria. That is an identity choice.
Sometimes the science has not caught up yet. But we're not saying it will not catch up.
But here's the thing.
But let me just make sure I name that too. Like, I understand what y'all are saying. I'm not disconnected from what you're saying. I totally get it. That's just how I am with you. You know what I mean? I'm always much more expansive, and I just want the reality of it is the science is not always right. I'm sorry.
But here's the last thing we can say, really, before we get on to questions that our audience has for both of you, is that there is a very big difference, and I think you're trying to speak about this, between science and identity.
That's right.
There is a very big difference. If you come out and say, I identify as non-binary, or I identify as gender fluid, gender queer, all these new terminologies that are coming out, that does not mean that you are experiencing gender dysphoria. If you are gender dysphoric, it does not mean that you are transgender. And this is what is not being talked about. We have lumped everybody under this umbrella of saying, if you identify as this, and that, you are gender dysphoric, and here is your treatment, here's the transition.
Non-binary people have always existed. Like, these groups have always existed. It's just now coming to a light where a lot more people are being educated about. Non-binary people have existed during your time.
But
they're called gender non-conforming.
Gender non-conforming folks have existed during your time.
That's right.
It's all social. It's not.
It's social.
It's not biological.
It's not biological.
It's just in 2022 we've just finally have gotten to this place where our visibility has taken form in television. It's taken forms here,
which is all great and stuff. But it's important that people see the difference between a person like myself who has an actual gender dysphoric diagnosis and somebody who chooses to identify as trans. I do not identify. But wait. I do not identify as a trans person. I identify as a man.
And that's fine.
I had a sex change, for lack of a better word. That's different than a non-binary person. So why am I lumped into that category?
I'm not excluding you, but
no, I don't think you are. I'm saying that I don't want to be a part of that.
Experience.
I don't want to be included.
I don't want to be included. I actually don't.
You don't have to. Like, nobody is forcing you to. But we have to look at the.
But you are, when you say I speak for the community, you're forcing me.
No, I never said that. This is what I was saying.
When we say LGBTQ, we are lumping people together into a community.
Well, I didn't say LGBTQ.
What?
No. I did not say that. But what I was saying was in the entirety of the trans experience. Everything that you said about who you are and yourself is valid. Just like everything I said about myself is valid. This is what I'm saying. The trans experience as a whole.
But then you said I have a responsibility as a trans person. No, I do not have a responsibility.
No, I'm going to tell you.
I have a responsibility for myself.
Hold on, Buck Angel. Let me clear that up.
She did, didn't she? I swear to God, she said that.
You did say he has a responsibility.
Yeah, she did.
No, so basically what I was saying was because of your platform. That's the only
But
thing I was
that's
talking
you're
about.
saying I have a responsibility as a transsexual man to
No,
use my.
that is not what I'm saying.
Okay,
what
then
I'm
I must have
saying
misunderstood.
As a platform. I'm not saying as a trans person.
But my
This
platform
what
is
happened.
as a transsexual
And that's
person.
fine. No. What I'm saying in general, just in general, we're not unpacking anything within that. What I was saying was I was bringing conscious awareness to the fact of, because you are in a powerful place in your platform that you've built a very long time, that the things you say could unintentionally cause harm to other people within the community. That is much harder than that. And they could be anybody, correct. I'm not gonna sit up here and just be like, oh my God, Buck, you're doing harm to the community, blah, blah, blah. That's not what I'm saying.
Okay.
What I'm saying here is you can have your thoughts, your opinions, and all of this other stuff or whatever, but there's also another side of it. And the only thing I was just trying to get you to understand is what that other side looks like. You don't have to.
Oh, I know what it looks like.
Oh,
I know what it looks like. I'm very aware of it.
All right.
And that was basically what I was saying.
Okay, right on.
So I'll keep you guys for another 20 to 30 minutes. You got it. We're going to get into some audience questions.
Okay, cool.
Me and Buck are good.
No, we
No,
are so
I'm
good,
not
my friend.
saying you're not.
No. Okay, but wait a minute. If me and you had to compete, you'd kick my ass.
There you go. All right. So you guys submitted these questions through Discord, which is our online community. You can join by going to the link in the description and sign up for our future guests if you have any questions for them, which I'm sure you will after watching this. Okay. Johnny Dragon 88 says, ask if they think that there is a social currency to being trans and promoting trans activism. If so, is it getting in the way of either of your messages?
That's a very good question.
It's a great question,
and,
actually.
Let me tell you something. For my work and my activism, I will get paid for it. And I'm going to tell you why. Because I've earned it. I deserve to make a living off my voice because I know my voice is powerful. There are some trans people that definitely disagree with me around that or whatever because of the spaces I get into or whatever. But the reality of it is, I know as a black person, as a trans person, I deserve to not only, one, sit in these spaces, but also to get paid for my work. So I do not apologize for that. But when we talk even more about it, you know what I mean? Is trans being hot? Is trans the hot topic? You know, trans people want to be, you know what I'm saying? Trans is the new thing now. It's a trend now or whatever. I don't agree with that because you're taking away from people's experience. You're taking away from people's reality when we deem that or whatever. I don't think trans is the hot topic, the hot thing. I think we're falling at the forefront of our issues or whatever. Although me and you don't agree with a lot of things or whatever, I still respect your experience and how you identify because you are we're part of the same community. And I don't have issue with, you know what I'm saying, with that or whatever. But, you know, you can't help how other people feel. And I just think that we're not a trend. This is our reality. And I think finally we're doing the due justice by being seen, by being heard, whether people like us or not. Because for so long, even just talking about like the generation you come from versus where I am as a millennial, you know what I mean? That work has progressed so much. And I do not like the infighting within our community that tries to erase you or deems me as less valuable than. I do not like that. Fair enough. You know, I just think that there are some people who only give a damn about the trans experience during Pride Month or during Transgender Day of Awareness or Transgender Day of Remembrance. These entities, these corporations, they only give a about us then.
So
you know
there is some sort of social currency to it then, if these corporations are deciding to only care about you on those days.
Absolutely.
Okay, okay.
I guess that's a better way of answering, but I just wanted to kind of just get into like the nitty gritty of it or whatever. But I, as a trans activist, I'll go into those corporations and make it benefit for me. Because if you need my voice there, if I'm the golden ticket at the Willy Wonka chocolate factory, then let me be the golden ticket.
I can't blame you for that. I really can't. If you're going to like use it, then I might as well benefit from it.
Because here's the reality of it is, you deserve that same golden ticket as well as I do. We deserve to be paid for our experience, to talk about it or whatever like that. We deserve that for ourselves. And I want my trans community, trans non-binary community to be empowered
Okay, fair
to
enough.
be empowered.
So, so to answer the question,
Yeah.
my research and watching the younger generation and things I see, like it's so. Why would I want to be cis? It's so cool to be trans. I actually saw a young person say that. So I won't deny that. I think there is some social currency to claiming trans. But the thing is, it's different than me. Again, here's what I need to say about that. These people are not necessarily physically transitioning. They're socially transitioning.
Yep.
So they can immediately go back to living in the cis space in 2 seconds without having any damage done to them or except the damage to the community. So that's something that I see that is happening in a way that is not positive for this community, because I think people are taking this trans identity on when they are not trans, but they're using it in a way that gets them sort of brownie points or the social currency.
And it's interesting because they will attack people who've gone through your experience. They will attack
Totally.
you. And it's interesting because both of you, in your stories, it seems, have struggled a long way to get to where you are today and been through a lot of hard stuff. Now, to see these young people take the trans identity and go, it's trendy, I want to be that, and then attack you.
I know.
It shows me that if you're willing to sit in that place and attack somebody, you must not be truly feeling the discomfort in your body that you're saying you're feeling.
Right.
Because if you did, you would identify so much with this experience, and you would say, I've struggled just as much as these people have.
That's right.
So I guess I'm looking at it from a different perspective around what that term means, because when I look at these corporations, going back to inclusivity, what they tend to do is they tend to take one trans person, tokenize them, and deem them the whole experience.
That's right.
And to be
That's
fair,
right.
I see a lot of it being done to our white trans siblings.
That's right.
Where they'll take their experience, which is going to be completely different than mine,
Sure.
and deem it the whole trans experience, and then deem them as inclusive of the trans experience.
That's right.
Yes,
And I
that's
found, and I did an Instagram video. I'm surprised you haven't looked at it yet. About this around Nikita Dragon, actually.
Oh, right,
And so,
yeah.
it was just. You got to catch the nuances around that, though.
Sure.
And you got to catch the okey doke with it. You know what I mean?
Fair
For
enough.
sure.
Okay, so let's get this next question from Chelsea. She says, do you both hope to see a different form of cure for gender dysphoria in the future, and one that doesn't require people to transition? So if science became conclusive that we can actually cure this disorder without transitioning people, is that the future that you would hope for?
I mean, I would. I honestly don't think my life is, it's only amazing because I made it this way, because I have to continually shoot testosterone for the rest of my life. I have to do all these things. This isn't what you see, what you get. There's a lot of behind the scenes stuff going on, mental as well. I have to do a lot of mental health care. It's not, I don't think it is a life of beauty. And I do think it would be remiss of me to say that everyone should just be trans and it's cool and it's awesome. That's not true. It's a thing you have to live with for the rest of your life. So of course, if there is a cure, whatever that means, right,
Sure.
where somebody isn't, I would definitely say that would be a positive, moving forward. Because why would you want to medicalize somebody for the rest of your life?
Right.
It's not a fun space for me. That's just my opinion.
So it's about alignment, and for some people, the cure is medical transition.
Sure.
And that's the reality. Let me
Yep.
make sure
Sure.
I name that. So again, when we talk about the trans experience not being a monolith, and it goes back to individual experience. For some trans non-binary folks, they don't want to get on hormones, and that could be their cure.
That's right.
Some do want to get on it, and we should be able to empower them as well. There are some trans folks that want to go get silicone injections and all this work done to their body, and that's fine. There are some that don't. It's all good. So the reality of it is people's cure is not going to look the same. And I think sometimes we get caught up in just reducing it down to medical transition. And you know what I mean? Because it's that physical, tangible thing. And for a lot of us, it's mental, it's emotional, it's even spiritual for some of us. And so, you know what I mean? Like everybody's experience is a lot different. But that medical part has saved my life as a trans person. And I don't apologize for that. And, that social part of a trans person who is not here or whatever probably saved their life.
Yeah.
And so I think we need to begin to open up pathways of understanding instead of being closed off and just reducing it to one mechanism.
Sure. Yeah, and I would totally agree with you. When you spoke about your experience.
You agree with me?
and there's a lot of conservatives disagree, and they say nobody should be able to transition ever.
Yeah,
and that's BS. I mean,
totally.
and when we met, and you told your story, which is a story that I'm sure many in the trans community go through, and if I can say this, you bought black market hormones.
Yeah.
Essentially, if had you received the wrong thing, mutilating yourself in a way that would have been completely irreversible had you not had somebody to go to. And people who are mutilating themselves, trying to transition on their own without medical supervision, absolutely go see somebody and go get that squared away. Because we have to acknowledge there are extremes on both ends. There are people who will never need medical transition, and there will be people who will. So speaking on that every trans experience is different, here's an interesting question from Cathuria on Discord. She asks, when did you guys gauge that your transition was successful? Was it when you passed as the opposite sex? Is it when you woke up one day and felt better? Is it a continuous struggle?
For me, it was when people saw me as a man and they stopped questioning whether I was a woman or a man. That was the end for me. That was when I basically woke up happy. So I would say it was definitely steps, right? So the steps were the testosterone, not knowing, because back in the day we didn't have the internet. That's how, so I couldn't look it up, right? How will I look in 5 years? No. I'm blindly walking through that space. So I would say it was definitely steps, and each one I got happier and happier. But when I was just basically recognized as a man, and I never had to say anything otherwise as I walked down the street. That to me was a successful transition.
I think for me, I'm still working on it because it's where I want to feel satisfied and content. Like, if you look at my documentary, One Life to Blossom, my facial feminization surgery is actually in the documentary. And when I got that, I felt so empowered, like, oh my God, I've been wanting this, and I still mourn my old face. So facial feminization surgery is when basically you have facial surgery to look more feminine and to feminize your face, for those of you that may not know what that is. And so when I got mine, it was just so beautiful and powerful and spiritual to me. And when I look at my old face, like I still mourn and I still love it, because for so long that's who I was, and I don't want to take that away from me. And so I think I'm still evolving and still learning, because for a lot of trans folks it could be our entire lives that we go through that. And I'm glad that you found somewhere in your life where you found that peace. But some of us as trans folks, we don't always find that peace. And I'm learning to embrace who I am and not compare myself to others, because I think for so long, a lot of us in the trans community, because of like the aesthetic of what someone should look like, we're forced into having to keep up with that aesthetic. Some of us do it to please a partner, some of us do it to please family, and you know what I mean? It all goes back to who you are and who you choose to be, or who you desire to be, or what you feel like you abundantly should be. And for me, it's been a long process, but I'm so grateful for the process, because every time I got kicked down and I was wounded, I can go back and look at the scars and go, yes, I went through that because I needed this change in my life, because I'm able to step into my true potential, step into my true power, and unapologize to anybody who has anything to say to me. But I know a lot of trans people don't have that privilege, and they don't have that self-esteem and that confidence just yet, but it's something that you build along the way. And I'm just grateful to be in a place, in a space where I have more resources and access to medical care whenever I need it.
Well, I do appreciate you acknowledging that you're still on the journey for it, because a lot of trans adults in particular will say, oh no, I'm fine, everything's perfect, and it's going to be perfect for you and your kids too.
That's right.
So here's something that is not often talked about enough, and I hope both of you can speak to this and give people a picture of what this looks like if you choose to implement this in your life. What are some of the long-term side effects or ramifications that you are dealing with to this day as part of your transition, if you're comfortable speaking about it?
It gets me a little bit emotional, because it has been a bumpy ride. It hasn't been easy, and that's what I want people to see. This is not something that you can just put on and take off, or when you choose to do this, it is on some level. I have chosen to do this, and I will continue to have to do this for the rest of my life. But I've had, again, I've been deemed a guinea pig, and that's a difficult space when you are on some level being used to figure out a system that is going to obviously help other people, but with that comes a lot of responsibility. And my responsibility, thank you. And my responsibility as a transsexual person is to be honest about the pros and cons of this situation. And why I cry, because I don't want anybody to be miserable. I want people to transition if they need to do that. But what I also want people to understand is it's not beautiful. Trans is not beautiful, and it can be a very difficult space to be in. And I suffered from long-term problems with my female reproductive system, because when I started to take the hormones and I started getting cramps and all these things, and nobody could help me. I would go to a gynecologist and they would call me a freak, and I would go to a doctor and they'd be like, I can't look at you, you're a weirdo. I mean, I got all kinds of stuff. I mean, so eventually the pain became a horrible problem, and my uterus and my cervix fused together. And it's the first recorded case in the history of the world. And the long-term use of testosterone took my uterus and took my cervix and put it together. And as you know, that's a sort of self-cleaning oven. And it just stopped. And what happened was I got an infection, which eventually, after 3 years of trying to go to doctors and saying, help me here, none of them could help me. They're like, oh, that's normal. That's just cramping. That's just normal cramping. And I'm like, no, it isn't. I got septic and I popped and I became septic, and I got to the hospital in enough time that the doctor could actually save my life. And he said, if you didn't come in 2 more minutes, you would be dead. And so I sit here and I'm emotional and cry, because you need to understand that it's not always so positive. And there are, I don't even know the other effects that 30 years of testosterone on my body has done to my body. I know it has changed my brain. I know that there are things going on with me that I'm sure are affected by the testosterone. But again, we don't have the research. That's what I want everybody to understand here. Yes, please understand it saved my life. It's the most amazing thing for that. But also understand the other side of that. And are you willing to take this on? Because if you're not, you better understand that these things are not fun, and they're not happy, and they're not great. But I think it's important that we as trans people start to talk about the actual cons of transitioning, and not just the pros, and not just hashtag trans is happy. You know, those, I see children getting sucked into it, that it upsets me, because I don't want a child to get sucked into something that is irreversible.
Yeah, it's so very clear.
I can never, ever go back to looking like you. Ever. And I used to look like you. No, I'm just kidding. So I'm sorry to get so emotional, but it really is something very dear and very in my heart, that I want anyone who needs to transition, but I also want people to understand the long-term effects of this journey.
Right. It's very clear why detransitioners have really taken a space in your heart.
That's right.
And why you talk about that. Thank you for sharing that.
So it makes me have more compassion for you and some of the things that you say, only because a lot of times we speak from experience. You know what I mean? Our own personal turmoil, our own personal experience, and thank you so much for sharing that part, because it kind of makes me understand you a little bit more, why you have the ideologies that you have. And I think we have to make room for that. And so, you know, I send love, healing. You know, we can have differences of opinion or whatever, but, you know, I mean, I'm a very caring and compassionate person. And so, by the grace of God, not yet. I have not experienced any, like, long-term effects. Because of things like that, it's kind of made me pause on gender-affirming surgery or bottom surgery, because I don't want that regret. And I was going through the process of gender-affirming surgery about 4 years ago. And I stopped right halfway through. And I got back into this whole ideology around body empowerment for myself. It's like, you know, Blossom, you don't have to do this if you don't want to. And so I didn't. But I've been struggling these last 2 years, you know, being in this pandemic, on whether I want to do the procedure. And it's taken a lot of mental and emotional understanding and spiritual understanding within myself. It's like, you know, Blossom, if you get this surgery, you can't go back to it. And, you know, I've heard, you know, some horror stories from some of the girls that have gotten it. And then I've also heard successful, beautiful stories from some of the girls that did get it. and they are living in their truth. So you never know which way it's going to go. There's always a risk when it comes to gender affirming surgeries. There's always going to be that risk. That's something that we cannot help. But if it means me being happy and complete, I will be willing to do that. So I'm still on that journey of understanding myself from a very spiritual, emotional, physical, mental kind of point of view around what it is that I want. And it's not easy. It's not really, really easy. And I'm just grateful that I'm in a place and space to do that, because I could have died several times. I used to be a sex worker. I've experienced violence. You know what I mean? I've had a gun held at me. Like, you know what I mean? I could have been gone a long time ago, but I know I have purpose, which is why I'm still here. And so trying to figure out within my purpose if this is a surgery that I want for me, not just because it's cool and hip for everybody else. It's a challenge. I'm not going to sit up here and lie to you. But, you know, we'll just see what happens. And, you know what I mean? That is the point. You know, there are sometimes long ramifications for the choices and decisions that we make when it comes to our transition. You can't help intentionality versus perception. You know, as long as you speak your intention, people are going to perceive what the fuck they want to say about you regardless. Sure. And I just think sometimes we get caught up in the perception that just because one trans person went through what they went through, that it's going to happen to all trans people. And that's not true. However, we don't need to take away from the person's story that it is. So in the trans experience, we have to get to this point where we make room to have that intersectional conversation around all of it. We don't need no parts left out. We have to get down to the nitty-gritty truth. And there is a disconnect between the older trans generation and the younger trans generation. But that's kind of like in every community, you know what I mean? But how do we bridge that gap? I think by at least having these kinds of conversations, you know what I mean? Like, I'm on a very conservative, like, platform. And, you know what I mean? And I think this conversation was great and empowering because it made me open up my eyes to a lot of things. And it kind of made me understand you a little bit more of the why. Because we don't always ask the why in things. Yep. And I believe when we start asking the why we feel the way we feel about certain issues, and I think in your situation, which you just named or whatever, it's like, oh, now I understand more of where you're coming from around it.
Perfect segue into the last question, Blossom, actually, because I think this entire conversation is been so helpful and is going to be so helpful. You guys are sitting in front of a very conservative audience for the most part, who are going to have dissident opinions to many of the things that you say, many of your life choices. And for me, it's very easy to come at this issue from a really hard stance of I'm anti this, I'm pro this, but if you do not meet people who have gone through the experience and have actually lived it, which is a massive set of struggles and lots of suffering, I think people don't realize, because it's been deemed a trend and because it's been deemed something that people just want to do and it's been glamorized, people don't realize the actual struggle that people go through in going through this. So the last question here is, what is the top thing on your side that you think is commonly misunderstood and that will bridge the gap once people understand it? Mine is that going through gender dysphoria and eventually medically transitioning or whatever it is, whatever path you take, it is hard. It is not easy. And it is not something that a lot of trans people, while they may be perceived as fighting for it, they're not fighting to go through that struggle that they go through every day. They are fighting to be able to save their lives, save their mental health. And I think a lot of people don't understand that when it comes to this debate. So I'm curious, what is something you want others to understand?
That trans folks are human too. We deserve basic human rights. We don't always agree on how to get them. But my basic human rights should not be stripped away by politicians who just are gagging at my experience. And when I say gagging, it's like, how dare I show up as a trans person and challenge your ideology? How dare I show up and challenge your beliefs? How dare I show up and challenge your values? How dare I show up and be my true, authentic trans self? Because I have to be. Because it's my reality. Because I need to sit at the table to show you that I exist. I have to. And I take my intersections with me. Being black, being trans, being from the South is a big one. Because a lot of people think that when you come from the deep South, you're uneducated. And that is not true. Some of the most powerful leaders come from the South. I come from the state where Oprah Winfrey is from, where Emmett Till was murdered, where Fannie Lou Hamer was big and down there. Like, I come from glory. And I am my ancestors' wildest dreams. And so I'm going to continue to show up and be the person that I need to be. What I need you to understand is I'm not an enemy. Mm-hmm. I'm really not an enemy. I just want my seat at the table as well, too. We don't have to agree on politics, but we should not have a conversation around whether I deserve to exist or not. And that's what's really happening here. We're erasing marginalized people for what reason? For politics? For anti-trans rhetoric? Like what? To show that you are mighty and powerful? I don't understand that. And I think that when you really sit down with a trans person and understand their experience and their stories, like what you told, I think that was a really powerful story. We begin to understand each other a little bit more around transness, around our identities, and around why we need to begin to be more inclusive. I always say, if you have power and access, why not use it for somebody that doesn't have it? And we can be on different sides of the political room or whatever, but invite me along so you can get a different perspective. You know what I'm saying? We can all still sit at the table. We may not agree or like each other or whatever, but we can still have these powerful, impactful conversations, because how are we going to move the needle forward? Now, I am very selective on the spaces that I go into. I don't go into those tremendous radical spaces, because within those radical spaces, I find that there's a lot of hatred and a lot of bigotry there. And it was so funny because it wasn't until I got around you that I saw a different light around that. Because not everybody doesn't want me to exist. Not everybody doesn't have inhumane thoughts about me. And that's why I love that we did that show, because being around you ladies, it really opened up my eyes. Okay, wow. There are people within the conservative arena that at least want me to exist, that are not trying to take away my basic rights. Although we don't agree on certain things within the spectrum, they're still not trying to take away my life or my livelihood. So why can't I not have a conversation with somebody whose views are different, but we can still coexist together? And that's why I appreciate you for inviting me into this space, because I just knew that when we did that episode, that for some reason me and you would probably be the ones that would click a little bit better, and because we were the ones that were just kind of like going at it the most though. But within that, it was just like, you know, I just felt so humbled that you invited me into your home. And so thank you so much for that space. And you know what I mean? And, you know, Buck, we definitely did not agree on any, you know what I'm saying, on anything.
I wasn't expecting it.
Yeah, I wasn't either,
but it makes a better conversation.
And I can appreciate, you know what I mean, despite everything or whatever, as a trans person, you know what I mean, I commend you for all of the work that you've done, and I think you do deserve to exist as much as I do. You know what I mean? It's just, we have to have more spaces like this to be able to talk about these issues.
I completely agree.
Yep. So
Buck?
it's great that you brought us on. I do appreciate it, because this is how our community sort of exists right now. We have a lot of differing opinions, and I think it's important for the world to see that we don't all agree here. You know, that's one of the takeaways that I think your viewers should take, is that we don't agree on many things that are going on, contrary to what the media puts out there. We are not a happy bunch of people. There are a lot of things going on in our community that are sort of put under the rug. And so the takeaway for me today would be that I think people need to see us as humans, that we do exist, which is what you said, but at the same time, there's a lot of things happening in our community that also need to be spoken about, and that that people see one side of that story only, and that there's many sides to the story, and that, as you can see, transitioning is not an easy space, but it is a life-saving space for many people. And that once you start to understand that, take the time to talk to a trans person, right? Whatever
simple.
your beliefs are, it doesn't matter. See me at Starbucks, come up and say hi to me. I will sit with you, I'll buy you a coffee, and I will talk to you, because that's one thing that I have noticed from my own platform and my own space, is that I've given time to people like you or other people who hate me, and it has turned into such a positive, amazing experience for me, and that those people have changed their minds around what they see. Because again, what you keep going to, it's not a monolithic community, but we're treated very monolithic, which is not fair to us as our own people, and that we have such a diverse way of being what we are. But I think the bottom line is that you must understand we are here. We're not going anywhere. I've been here for 30 years. I've been in this stuff. And just try to have some compassion for us, and try to understand that we just want to live life and move forward. And we want to be a part of the world. I want to be a part of the world. I do not want to stand away from you. I want to participate. I want to be in it. I want to create businesses. I want to be part of all of it. And that is a very important part of my message. I don't want to stand away from you. I want to stand with you.
Amazing. Well, I commend both of you for coming on the show today and having this very long discussion. Now, I would be remiss if I didn't have you tell the audience where they can find you, where they can follow your own work, because I'm sure many are going to want to hear more from you if they did not get enough today. Blossom, where can they find you?
So I'm on Instagram at Blossom C. Brown. My tarot astrology page is Tell All Blossom. On TikTok, I'm Coach Blossom C. Brown. Twitter, Blossom C. Brown. Please follow your girl. Show some love.
Beautiful.
Right on.
I love
Right
you.
on.
No.
Right on.
And Buck?
Oh, I'm Buck Angel and everything, but watch out for Twitter. Twitter Buck Angel, Instagram Buck Angel. Oh, my YouTube is Buck Angel Official, and there you can see a lot of the D-Trans stories.
Amazing. Thank you guys again for coming on, and leave a comment down below. What did you learn today watching this? Because I imagine there's going to be people from all over the spectrum watching. Did you learn more about the conservative beliefs on this? Did you learn more about the liberal beliefs? Did you learn from Buck, who's sitting in the middle there? Did you learn to be compassionate for either of the sides? Drop that in the comments down below, and of course we encourage healthy debate. So if you don't like something that somebody said, let them know. Go back and forth respectfully, and if you want to talk about this further, we'll be in the Discord server. Click the link in the description down below. Please like, subscribe, click the notification bell to be notified every single time we post a video for you guys, which is every day, and we'll be back. This is the first of many conversations like this.